The pen hovered a fraction of an inch above the signature line. The air conditioning in the downtown Charleston conference room hummed a low, steady note, but the room felt suffocating. Across the mahogany table, my mother Sylvia smiled. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the leather binder. "Just sign it, Harper," she said. Her voice was smooth and practiced. "It is for the family." And she thought she was 2 strokes of ink away from securing a $200,000 line of credit. She believed she had cornered her daughter. What Sylvia did not know, and what she could not see looking at my calm hands, was that I had spent the last 6 months conducting a forensic audit of her entire life. Welcome back to Elena Vengeance, where we uncover the truth behind closed doors. If you have ever been treated like an ATM by the people who were supposed to protect you, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me how old you are now, and how old you were when you realized your family saw you as a transaction. I read every single one, and if you are new here, hit subscribe. You will want to stick around to see how this audit ends. To understand how I ended up sitting across from my mother with a dossier of her financial crimes, you have to rewind 9 years. I was turning 16. Most girls in town celebrated with a party on Folly Beach or a fancy dinner on King Street. I walked into our kitchen hoping for a slice of cake. Instead, Sylvia stood by the marble island and slid a single sheet of paper across the counter. It was a printed invoice. The ink was still fresh. $800 itemized, rent, utilities, and a groceries tax for the privilege of living in my own childhood bedroom. I stared at the paper. The humidity from the open window suddenly felt heavy on my chest. I asked her if it was a joke. Sylvia did not blink. "Nothing in life is free, Harper," she said. "You are old enough to pull your weight." My father David sat at the kitchen table nursing his second bourbon of the evening. He stared at the condensation forming on his glass. He never looked at me. My younger sister Madison, who was 14 and treated like a town princess, sat on the sofa scrolling on her phone. She did not even look up. I told my mother I was a high school junior. I told her I had college prep courses. David shifted in his chair. The ice in his glass clinked. "You should be grateful." He muttered his words, slurring just a fraction. "You are lucky we let you stay in your grandmother's house." The kitchen went dead quiet. Sylvia whipped her head toward him, her eyes narrowed into tiny slits. "Our house, David," she snapped. The correction was sharp and immediate. I was 16. I did not understand real estate law. I did not know what a title deed was or how a trust operated. I only knew that the house had belonged to my late grandmother before she passed away. I let the comment fade into the humid air, unaware that my father had just handed me the key to my own salvation. But that realization was still years away. That night, I just felt trapped. 2 days later, I walked into a seafood restaurant on Market Street and begged for a job bussing tables. I spent my junior year smelling like bleach and fried shrimp. I worked until my hands cramped. Every first of the month, I placed an envelope of wrinkled $20 bills onto the kitchen counter. I bought my own survival week by week, believing I was keeping our family afloat. I had no idea I was financing my own replacement. The reality of a 35-hour work week while navigating the rigid schedule of a high school junior is not a test of character. It is a slow, steady erosion of the body and the mind. My alarm buzzed at 5 in the morning every weekday. I caught the early city bus clutching a travel mug of bitter black coffee just to keep my eyes focused through first period geometry. I spent my afternoons rushing from the final school bell to the cramped employee locker room at the restaurant, changing out of my school clothes and into a polyester polo shirt that perpetually smelled of fried shrimp and industrial floor cleaner. I hauled heavy plastic bus tubs loaded with ceramic plates and half-eaten meals. I wiped down sticky tables while tourists complained to me about the southern humidity, and every single paycheck I earned was funneled directly into a plain white envelope. On the first of every month, I placed that envelope on the kitchen counter. $800 in crisp 20s and 10s. Sylvia never said thank you. She would slide a polished fingernail under the flap, count the bills with practiced clinical efficiency, and offer a brief, tight nod. The transaction was cold, sterile, and deeply humiliating. I convinced myself I was doing the noble thing. I believed my sweat was keeping the lights on and the water running in our Charleston home. I thought I was part of a necessary survival pact for our family. While I scrubbed tables, Madison lived a remarkably different adolescence. My younger sister did not know the scent of industrial bleach. She spent her afternoons lounging on the back porch, posting sunset photos and complaining about the internet speed. Sylvia catered to her every whim, claiming Madison had a delicate disposition that required a stress-free environment. I watched this dynamic play out daily, swallowing the bitterness because I trusted the narrative. I truly thought our family was teetering on the brink of financial ruin. Then the calendar flipped to October. Madison turned 16. I remembered my own 16th birthday with crystal clarity. The printed invoice, the cold demand for rent, the swift removal of any illusion that I was a cherished child. I fully expected Sylvia to sit Madison down at the Marble Island and deliver the exact same harsh lesson about the high cost of living. I waited for the second invoice to appear. It never did. Instead, I woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of high-pitched shrieking coming from the front yard. I walked out onto the porch, squinting against the bright morning sun. Parked squarely in our driveway was a brand-new Honda Civic. The silver paint gleamed flawless and untouched with a giant red ribbon stretched across the hood. Madison was jumping up and down, hugging Sylvia, while David stood off to the side holding a cup of coffee and smiling weakly. I stood frozen on the concrete steps. The humid air suddenly felt frigid against my skin. I looked at the shiny chrome wheels and then down at my own hands, red and cracked from industrial dish soap. A car. They bought her a $22,000 car. I marched down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my bare feet. I looked directly into Sylvia's eyes. My voice was a low, tight wire. "How did we pay for this?" Sylvia stopped smiling. She adjusted the collar of her silk blouse, turning to me with a look of manufactured pity. "Do not ruin your sister's special day, Harper. We managed our savings. Your father received a performance bonus at the logistics firm. Madison needs safe transportation for her dance practices and volunteer work." I stared at her. A bonus. David had worked the exact same mid-level management job for a decade, and his stagnant salary was a constant source of Sylvia's complaints. There was no bonus. "I am paying $800 a month just to sleep in my own room," I said, the anger vibrating in my throat. "You told me we were barely making ends meet. You told me nothing in life is free." Sylvia stepped closer, lowering her voice so the neighbors tending their lawns would not hear. "You are paying your fair share as a working adult," she hissed. "Do not stand there and act jealous because we decided to bless your sister. She does not have the earning capacity you do. You should be proud to help your family instead of questioning my financial decisions." She spun on her heel and walked back to Madison, leaving me standing next to a vehicle funded by my own exhaustion. I did not go to my restaurant shift that afternoon. I called in sick for the first time in a year. When Sylvia took Madison out for a celebratory lunch and David retreated to the garage to tinker with his tools, I walked straight into my mother's home office. The room smelled of her signature lavender perfume and polished wood. I went directly to the mahogany filing cabinet beside her desk. The top drawer was unlocked. Sylvia was meticulous about her records, but she was also arrogant. She never believed anyone under her roof would dare question her authority, let alone investigate it. I leafed through the neatly labeled manila folders until my fingers brushed against a thick envelope bearing the logo of the local Honda dealership. I pulled it out and spread the paperwork across the pristine desk blotter. The sales contract was dated 2 days prior. I scanned past the vehicle identification number and the warranty details, my eyes locking onto the financing breakdown. The total purchase price was clearly printed. Below that was the line item for the cash down payment, $9,600. I sank into the leather desk chair. The numbers echoed in my mind. I did the math instantly. $800 a month multiplied by 12 months, $9,600. The exact amount I had handed to Sylvia over the past year down to the very last dollar. There was no performance bonus. There were no managed savings. My mother had extorted rent from a high school junior, forced me to work until my grades slipped and my hands bled, all to gather the cash down payment for my sister's luxury vehicle. I was not keeping the lights on. I was subsidizing the golden child. I folded the dealership contract and slipped it back into the envelope, placing it exactly where I found it. I walked out to the garage and found David organizing his wrench set. I stood behind him, my shadow falling over his workbench. I told him I saw the dealership receipt. I told him I knew exactly where the down payment came from. My father did not turn around. He kept his focus entirely on the metal tools in his hands, wiping a clean wrench with a grease-stained rag. "Harper," he sighed, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a man who surrendered a long time ago. "Do not upset your mother. Just let it go. It is easier this way." Easier for him. Devastating for me. I realized right then that arguing with them was useless. Confrontation without leverage was just noise, and Sylvia controlled the volume. If I wanted to survive this house, I needed more than righteous anger. I needed proof. The next day after my shift, I walked to a hardware store and purchased a small fireproof lockbox. I hid it deep under my bed behind a stack of old winter sweaters I never wore in South Carolina. I started slipping into the home office late at night when the house was quiet. I took clear photographs of bank statements, utility bills, and tax returns using my phone. I printed the photos at the school library, paying 10 cents a page, and filed them away in the dark. Every piece of paper was another brick in a foundation I was quietly building. I did not know what I was going to do with the documents yet, but I knew their precise value. I treated my own family like a hostile corporate entity. The lockbox under my mattress grew heavier with each passing week. The Honda Civic receipt was just the beginning of my quiet nocturnal investigation. I thought I had uncovered the worst of my mother's financial manipulation. But what I did not know was that Sylvia was hiding a secret much darker than a stolen down payment. The arrival of a thick envelope in the mail is a universal symbol of escape for high school seniors. For me, it represented survival. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early April when I pulled the heavy parchment package from our aluminum mailbox. The return address read, University of Washington. I stood in the driveway gripping the thick folder, feeling the weight of my future in my palms. Acceptance. I had spent countless nights studying under the dim glow of a cheap desk lamp, ignoring the ache in my feet from the restaurant shifts just to earn the grades required to leave the South. Holding that envelope, I could almost smell the pine trees and the cold rain of Seattle. The Atlantic Ocean would no longer be a boundary keeping me contained. It would be the distance between me and my mother. My escape plan relied on a single financial lifeline. Before my paternal grandmother passed away, she set up a joint savings account in both of our names, specifically designated for my university education. I knew the balance hovered right around $18,000. It was a modest sum, but it was enough to cover my freshman tuition and secure a dorm room deposit. Sylvia and David knew the money existed, but because my name was on the account as the primary beneficiary, I naively believed the funds were safe. The morning after receiving my acceptance letter, I took the city bus to the local bank branch on Broad Street. I wanted to request a certified cashier's check for the university deposit. The air conditioning inside the lobby chilled the sweat on my neck. I handed my identification to the teller, a kind older woman with silver-framed glasses. I asked her for the current balance and a withdrawal slip. She typed my account number into her keyboard. Her fingers paused. She squinted at the monitor, tapped another key, and then printed a narrow receipt. She slid the thin strip of paper across the polished counter. $14.12. I stared at the black ink. The numbers did not make sense. I asked her to check again, assuming there was a typographical error. The teller offered a sympathetic smile and rotated her monitor so I could see the screen. There was no error. I asked for the transaction history. She printed a second longer sheet of paper. My eyes scanned the columns. 6 months prior, a series of maximum allowable transfers had bled the account dry. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. The withdrawal dates aligned perfectly with a specific timeline I recognized immediately. The air left my lungs. The marble floor of the bank felt like it was tilting beneath my sneakers. I did not cry. Crying requires a sudden shock, but this felt like a slow, familiar poison seeping into my veins. I folded the receipt, slipped it into my pocket, and walked out into the blinding afternoon sun. When I arrived back at the house, I found Sylvia in the kitchen. She was humming a soft tune, wiping down the pristine granite countertops with a microfiber cloth. The entire kitchen had been gutted and rebuilt over the winter holidays. I walked up to the island and pulled the folded bank receipt from my pocket. I placed it flat on the granite directly in her line of sight. I asked her where my college tuition went. Sylvia stopped humming. She glanced at the receipt and then continued wiping the counter, her expression devoid of guilt or surprise. She did not even attempt to deny it. She tossed the cloth into the sink and sighed, as if I was interrupting a peaceful afternoon with a trivial complaint. "I needed to upgrade the cooking space, Harper," she said, her tone casual and breezy. "The old cabinets were peeling and the appliances were outdated. It was embarrassing to host guests." I pointed a trembling finger at the receipt. "That was $18,000 for my education." "Grandmother left that for me. You drained the entire account." Sylvia crossed her arms and leaned against the sink. She gestured toward the wall behind the stove. "Look at the backsplash, Harper. Just look at it." I looked. The wall was covered in custom-fired ceramic tiles imported from Italy. Each individual square was intricately engraved with a delicate palmetto and crescent moon pattern. They shimmered under the expensive recessed lighting. They were beautiful, excessive, and entirely unnecessary. Those specific tiles were the physical manifestation of my stolen future. "It is an investment in our home," she continued, her voice hardening into a defensive edge. "This house is our primary asset. Upgrading the kitchen increases the property value for the whole family. You are so selfish, focusing only on your own out-of-state fantasy when we have a household to maintain right here." Selfish. The word struck me like a physical blow. I had worked 35 hours a week to hand over my wages for a car I never drove. And now I was staring at a wall of decorative Italian ceramics paid for by my stolen education. The gaslighting was so profound it bordered on theatrical. I realized right then that the Atlantic Ocean was not a distance I was going to cross. It was a moat. The city was a prison, and Sylvia was the warden. I was not going to Seattle. I could not afford the flight, let alone the out-of-state tuition. The anger that had been simmering inside me crystallized into a cold, hard stone. I looked at the custom tiles one last time, burning their intricate patterns into my memory. I turned back to my mother. "Take my name off the joint account today," I said. My voice was eerily steady. "I will not have my Social Security number attached to a drained account you might overdraw and ruin my credit. Remove my name by tomorrow." Sylvia despised defiance. She demanded compliance disguised as gratitude. My cold directive sparked a dangerous flash in her eyes. She stood up straight, the casual domestic facade vanishing. "You want to act like an independent adult making demands in my house?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Fine. The cost of living is rising, Harper. Adult inflation impacts everyone. Your rent is now $1,000 a month, effective immediately." She turned her back to me and began organizing her spice rack, dismissing me from her presence. The dream of the West Coast died that afternoon. I withdrew my university application the next morning. Instead, I enrolled in a local community college, choosing a paralegal studies program because the classes were cheap and offered during the evening. To cover the new $1,000 extortion fee, I quit the seafood restaurant and secured a job at a high-end hotel on King Street. My new reality was a masterclass in endurance. I wore a stiff navy blazer and a plastic name tag standing behind a polished mahogany front desk for 10 hours a day. I smiled at wealthy tourists, handing them room keys and recommending ghost tours while my own life felt like a drowning exercise. I memorized legal terminology on the night bus ride home. My lockbox under the bed gained a new document. The bank transaction history of the drained college fund joined the Honda dealership receipt. Every first of the month, the white envelope I placed on the kitchen island grew thicker. $1,000 in cash, a staggering sum for a teenager trying to fund her own education out of pocket. I was walking a financial tightrope suspended over a concrete floor. I survived by never sleeping, never spending a dime on myself, and never making a single mistake. But a tightrope built on exhaustion is inherently fragile. It only takes one mild gust of wind to destroy the balance. I was pushing my physical limits to the absolute breaking point just to meet Sylvia's demands. I paid the $1,000 every single month without fail. But the hospitality industry is unpredictable, and corporate payroll systems are run by machines that do not care about a teenager facing eviction. I was working myself to the bone to survive. What happens when a machine delays a paycheck and that vital envelope is 2 days late? The first of the month always carried a metallic taste of dread. As a 19-year-old balancing full-time coursework with grueling 12-hour shifts at the hotel front desk, my margin for error was non-existent. The corporate payroll system at the King Street Grand operated with mechanical indifference. An automated email hit my inbox at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. A processing error at the regional financial institution meant direct deposits would be delayed by 48 hours. Panic is a cold sensation. It started in my stomach and crawled up my throat, tightening my airway. I stood behind the polished mahogany counter, smiling at tourists, checking them in, handing out electronic room keys while calculating my exact doom. I did not possess $1,000 in physical cash. Every cent I earned was meticulously budgeted to cover tuition, textbooks, bus fare, and the extortion fee Sylvia required. There was no safety net. I drafted a careful text message to my mother, explaining the corporate glitch, promising the white envelope would rest on the kitchen counter by Monday morning. I pressed send. She did not reply. The digital silence was an answer of its own. I drove my rusted Toyota sedan home long after the sun had disappeared behind the Cooper River Bridge. My feet throbbed inside my stiff uniform shoes. Each pedal press sent a spike of pain up my calves. I pulled into the driveway expecting a stern lecture or perhaps a slammed door. Instead, I saw dark plastic. 5 heavy-duty contractor trash bags sat on the damp grass near the porch steps. They resembled discarded bodies under the amber glow of the neighborhood street lamp. I parked the car and walked slowly across the manicured lawn. A familiar floral scent drifted through the humid air. My clothes, my textbooks, my paralegal study guides, they were stuffed haphazardly into the bags, stretching the cheap plastic to its tearing point. I rushed up the concrete stairs and shoved my key into the front door deadbolt. The metal cylinder refused to turn. I jiggled the brass ring. The pins inside were different. A fresh, shiny lock glared back at me, mocking my attempt to enter my own childhood home. A shadow moved behind the sheer living room curtains. Sylvia stood on the other side of the glass. The interior lamp illuminated her sharp features. She wore her expensive silk robe holding a tall glass of iced tea. She did not look angry or betrayed. She looked victorious. I placed my palm flat against the cold window pane. Sylvia locked eyes with me. She raised a manicured finger and pointed down at the heap of trash bags on the lawn. Then she mouthed 5 distinct, deliberate words. "Rent is due the 1st. She turned her back and walked deeper into the hallway, leaving me standing in the dark. The front door cracked open a few inches. The new deadbolt clicked. David slipped through the narrow gap and pulled the heavy wood shut behind him quickly to ensure I could not push my way inside. He wore his faded pajama pants and a white undershirt. He looked down at the damp grass, refusing to meet my gaze. He shuffled down the steps and stopped a few feet away from me. He reached into his pocket and extended his hand. Between his knuckles rested a crumpled $50 bill. "Take this," he whispered, his voice trembling with pathetic hesitation. "Go find a cheap motel for the weekend. Just come back on Monday, hand her the envelope, and apologize." I stared at the green paper fluttering in the evening breeze. An apology. He wanted me to beg for forgiveness because a corporate banking error delayed the payment my mother demanded. He wanted me to accept the role of a delinquent tenant rather than a teenage daughter experiencing a crisis. I looked at the man who was supposed to protect me from the cruelty of the world. "Keep your money, David," I said. The use of his first name made him flinch. I turned away from him and began dragging the heavy plastic bags toward my car. The plastic scraped loudly against the concrete driveway. He stood there watching me haul my entire life into a rusted trunk. He did not offer to help lift a single bag. I saved the most crucial item for last. Hidden inside an old canvas duffel bag beneath a pile of winter coats was the fireproof lockbox, the bank statements, the dealership receipts, the printed transaction logs. I placed it gently into the passenger seat, strapping the seat belt across the metal lid to ensure it remained secure. It was the only valuable thing I owned. I started the engine, the serpentine belt squealing in the quiet suburban neighborhood, and backed out into the street. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I drove until I reached the sprawling asphalt ocean of a 24-hour Walmart supercenter. I parked under the glaring fluorescent lights far away from the store entrance, alongside a row of weathered camper vans and resting truck drivers. I locked the doors, reclined the driver's seat, and pulled a thin fleece jacket over my chest. The interior of the car smelled like stale coffee and hot plastic. I was 19 years old. I had nowhere to go. The reality of homelessness is not a dramatic cinematic sequence. It is the creeping, terrifying realization that you no longer have a physical space in the world where you belong. The night air cooled rapidly, seeping through the thin windows and chilling my bones. Staring up at the yellow parking lot lights, a visceral memory flooded my mind, piercing through the cold reality of my current situation. I was 10 years old, sitting on the braided rug in my paternal grandmother's living room. The rich scent of her freshly baked biscuits and sweet tea filled the air. She was a fierce, proud woman who understood the harshness of the world and fought tirelessly to shield her family from it. She knelt beside me, her hands worn and calloused from decades of labor. She placed a heavy ceramic piggy bank into my lap. It was painted with bright blue birds and intricate vines. She folded my small fingers around the cold painted clay. "Listen to me, sweetheart," she said, her dark, intelligent eyes locking onto mine. "This world will try to charge you for breathing, but I made sure you will always have a roof over your head. I promise you that. You will never be out in the cold." The memory shattered against the steering wheel. I made sure you will always have a roof over your head. The agonizing irony tasted like ash in my mouth. My grandmother made a solemn promise she believed was legally and morally unbreakable. Yet here I was, shivering in a beat-up Toyota, paying for the privilege of existing, while the woman who birthed me slept soundly on a mattress I helped finance. I traced the edge of the metal lockbox sitting in the passenger seat. I finally understood the fundamental truth of my existence within the Morgan family. I was never a daughter to Sylvia. I was a revenue stream. I was a machine designed to dispense cash upon request and discardable the moment the gears ground to a halt. They thought tossing me out into the street would break my spirit. They assumed the terror of sleeping in a retail parking lot would force me back to their doorstep groveling with $1,000 in hand by Monday morning. They miscalculated. The trash bag eviction did not shatter me. It severed the invisible chains of guilt and obligation. It set me free. Cut off and homeless at 19, the road ahead was steep and unforgiving. How does a discarded teenager rebuild an entire life from the driver's seat of a rusted sedan in a Walmart parking lot? The transformation from a terrified teenager sleeping in a discount store parking lot to a self-sufficient professional is not a montage set to an inspiring soundtrack. It is a brutal, unglamorous grind. It is 5 years of relentless physical and emotional endurance. The morning after the trash bag eviction, I drove my rusted sedan directly to the King Street Hotel, arriving 3 hours before my scheduled shift. I washed my face in the employee restroom, brushing my teeth with cold tap water and changing into my crisp navy blazer. I smiled at wealthy tourists handing out electronic room keys while silently mapping out my survival strategy. I never returned to the house on my old street. The $1,000 envelope I had intended to surrender on Monday morning became the security deposit for a tiny, airless studio apartment situated above a noisy BBQ joint. The quarters were cramped, smelling perpetually of smoked pork and exhaust fumes, but the deadbolt was mine. I controlled who possessed the key. My days blurred into a grueling cycle of labor and academia. I maintained my full-time hours at the hotel, utilizing the quiet midnight shifts to pore over my paralegal textbooks behind the polished mahogany desk. My diet consisted primarily of instant ramen noodles and discounted day-old pastries. I did not attend social gatherings. I did not purchase new clothing. Every surplus dollar was channeled toward my community college tuition. The fireproof lockbox remained securely tucked beneath my twin mattress, serving as a constant silent reminder of what happens when you trust the wrong people. 5 years of calculated discipline eventually yielded a tangible result. I graduated with highest honors, securing a position as a certified title examiner at a prestigious escrow firm located in the financial heart of downtown Charleston. My role required surgical precision. I spent my days analyzing complex property deeds, untangling dense municipal records, and verifying the legal ownership of multi-million-dollar estates. I learned the intricate language of contracts, liens, and irrevocable trusts. More importantly, I met Leo. He was contracted by my firm to overhaul our internal digital security framework. He possessed the quiet, methodical disposition typical of a seasoned IT systems architect. He was a man who communicated in logic rather than emotion. Where my family thrived on theatrical chaos, Leo operated with calm, deliberate certainty. He never raised his voice. He never weaponized guilt. Our relationship evolved slowly, built upon a foundation of mutual respect and quiet stability. I was 24 years old, occupying my own modern apartment, boasting a respectable salary, and anchored by a partner who understood the value of a peaceful home. The Morgan family was a closed chapter. I had effectively excised the tumor, or so I believed. Toxic systems do not disappear simply because you stop participating in them. They lie dormant, waiting for an opportunity to extract new resources. The 5-year silence shattered on a humid Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a commercial zoning permit when my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number flashed across the screen. I opened the text message. The opening sentence carried a chilling familiarity. "We need to talk about family obligations, Harper." It was Sylvia. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not inquire about my career, my health, or my living situation. The text message bypassed any pretense of maternal affection, diving straight into the transactional nature she preferred. Madison was engaged. The golden child was planning an extravagant destination wedding in the Maldives. Sylvia was not contacting me to extend an invitation to the ceremony. She was presenting a demand. The message detailed an elaborate itinerary for a week-long bachelorette excursion in luxury cabanas, including private chartered yachts and premium catering. She stated the total cost exceeded $25,000. She then outlined my required contribution, $10,000. She claimed it was my duty as the elder sibling to ensure Madison experienced the celebration she deserved, especially considering the trouble I caused during my teenage years. I stared at the glowing screen. The audacity was breathtaking. 5 years of absolute silence following a brutal physical eviction. And her first instinct was to issue a 5-figure invoice for a party I was not even invited to attend. She still viewed me as an ATM. The only difference was the magnitude of the withdrawal request. I did not reply. I did not engage in a futile debate regarding fairness or history. I simply utilized the block function on my device, severing the digital connection instantly. I placed the phone face down on my desk and returned to my zoning documents. I underestimated her vindictiveness. Blocking Sylvia did not end the conflict. It merely altered the battleground. Denied direct access to my bank account, my mother launched a scorched-earth digital campaign designed to leverage public shame. By the weekend, my extended family began bombarding my social media profiles. Sylvia had crafted a masterful narrative painting herself as a destitute, long-suffering matriarch abandoned by a wealthy, arrogant daughter. She posted tearful videos claiming David was struggling with medical bills, while I selfishly hoarded a lucrative corporate salary. Aunts and cousins I had not spoken to in a decade flooded my inbox with vicious accusations, labeling me a narcissistic monster and a disgrace to our family. The digital onslaught was overwhelming. I sat on the edge of my living room sofa, scrolling through the vitriolic comments, feeling a phantom echo of the panic that once choked me in the hotel lobby. Leo walked into the room carrying 2 mugs of green tea. He set them down on the glass coffee table and gently pulled the phone from my trembling fingers. He scanned the barrage of hateful messages, his expression remaining entirely neutral. He did not suggest I defend myself online. He did not advise me to apologize or appease the mob. "Let them talk," he set, his voice a steady, grounding frequency. "They are performing for an audience of enablers. You do not need to correct their fiction. You hold the pen now. They cannot touch your reality unless you hand them the paper." He was right. I possessed a stable career, a secure home, and the fireproof lockbox. The digital screaming was nothing more than impotent rage from a system that no longer controlled my survival. I resolved to ignore the smear campaign, maintaining my clinical detachment, and focusing entirely on my professional obligations. I assumed the storm would eventually burn itself out as Sylvia exhausted her supply of manufactured outrage. I prepared to resume my quiet, methodical life. I believed the barrier between my professional sanctuary and my toxic origins was impenetrable. I assumed the battle would remain confined to glowing screens and distant gossip. I was wrong. The conflict was about to breach my fortress. Harper successfully ignores the digital abuse, insulating her mind from the familial noise. But what happens when her family's desperate financial maneuvers bypass the internet entirely and land directly on her professional desk? Disguised as a routine banking assignment, the escrow firm occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Charleston harbor. For me, it was not just a workplace. It functioned as a sanctuary of logic. The environment thrived on predictability. Documents arrived in neat digital queues. Contracts were executed with precise signatures. Discrepancies were resolved through codified statutes. There was no room for emotional manipulation or gaslighting within the four corners of a legal deed. The truth existed in black and white ink recorded by municipal clerks and stamped with official government seals. I found immense comfort in this rigid structure. It was the exact opposite of the household I had escaped. It was a Thursday morning. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the view of the Atlantic horizon. I finished my second cup of dark roast coffee and clicked the mouse to open the next file assigned to my terminal. It was a standard residential refinancing order originating from a prominent regional credit union. Routine paperwork. I dragged the cursor down to verify the subject property location. My hand froze. The ergonomic mouse slipped slightly from my grip. I stared at the glowing pixels on my high-resolution monitor. The numbers and the street name registered in my brain, triggering an involuntary physical reaction. A cold sweat prickled along my hairline. The address listed on the banking application was the split-level house I grew up in. I moved my eyes to the borrower identification fields. David Morgan. Sylvia Morgan. I sat motionless, listening to the low hum of the office ventilation system. The coincidence was unsettling, but Charleston is a small city. Escrow orders are routed through automated geographic distribution grids. My zip code designation had inadvertently pulled my own parents into my professional domain. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my heart rate to steady. I was a certified examiner. I pushed my personal history aside and evaluated the loan application with a cold, critical eye. Sylvia and David were petitioning the credit union for a home equity line of credit. The requested amount was staggering $200,000. The stated purpose on the application read, structural renovations and debt consolidation. I knew better. The timing aligned flawlessly with Madison and her extravagant destination wedding in the Maldives. The luxury cabanas, the private yachts, the premium catering. Sylvia had failed to extort $10,000 from my savings. The vicious social media smear campaign had yielded no financial results. Her backup plan involved leveraging the very roof over her head to maintain the illusion of wealth for her youngest daughter. The sheer recklessness of the maneuver was astonishing. My job required me to ensure the property was clear of any legal encumbrances before the bank would issue the funds. I initiated a preliminary title search, querying the local municipal database for outstanding claims against the address. A red notification banner immediately materialized on my screen. I clicked the alert. An active mechanics lien was recorded against the property exactly 8 months prior. The claimant was a local roofing contractor. The unpaid balance was $15,000. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. A bitter, cynical smile crept across my face. This was it. This was the dark, embarrassing secret Sylvia was fighting so desperately to hide. They were broke. They were drowning in unsecured debt, dodging blue-collar contractors, while parading around the city, projecting an aura of elite prosperity. They wanted a $200,000 credit line, not just to fund a wedding, but to bail themselves out of a sinking financial ship. I felt a fleeting wave of smug vindication. The woman who had charged me $800 a month to sleep in my own bedroom, the woman who evicted me in trash bags for missing a deadline by 2 days, was currently defaulting on her own obligations. The pristine granite countertops and the custom Italian ceramic tiles were nothing but a facade masking a crumbling foundation. I pulled a fresh legal pad from my desk drawer, preparing to draft a standard rejection notice to the credit union. The bank would never approve a 6-figure credit line with an outstanding mechanics lien clouding the title. The Maldives wedding would have to be canceled. Justice felt remarkably administrative. My satisfaction, however, was brief. A rejection notice required a comprehensive file. I could not simply flag the recent lien and close the window. Federal banking regulations and internal company protocols demanded a pristine, unbroken chain of titles spanning at least 30 years. I had to verify the original vesting deed. I needed to establish the exact moment Sylvia and David legally acquired the property from my late grandmother. It was a tedious procedural formality, but my professional reputation was built on meticulous accuracy. I refused to let my personal amusement compromise the integrity of my work. I adjusted my posture, shaking off the residual irony. I accessed the deeper county archives, adjusting the search parameters to retrieve property transfers filed during the late 90s. I typed in my grandmother's legal name and the property's parcel identification number. The specific year was 1998. The era of scanned paper documents meant the database required a few extra seconds to retrieve the heavy image files. The gray loading circle spun on my screen. I took a sip of my cooling coffee, watching the rain streak the glass windows across the office floor. I expected to see a standard quitclaim or warranty deed, a simple piece of paper transferring ownership from a dying matriarch to her son and daughter-in-law, a common generational handover. The loading circle vanished. The digitized document materialized in sharp, high-contrast black and white. I scanned the bold header printed across the top margin. I moved my eyes down to the grantee clause, the specific legal paragraph designating the receiving party of the real estate transfer. The ambient noise of the busy office, the ringing telephones, the clacking keyboards, the hum of the servers, all of it faded into a thick, suffocating silence. The air vanished from my lungs. The coffee turned to ash in my mouth. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. My eyes darted across the text, reading the same 3 paragraphs over and over again, unable to process the legal reality staring back at me. The $15,000 contractor's lien was nothing but a trivial distraction. It was a minor crack in a house of mirrors. The true foundation of my family was built on a crime so audacious it defied comprehension. It is not just a contractor's lien. What did Harper just find in the 1998 county archives? The digitized document staring back at me from the county archive database did not bear the standard phrasing of a routine property transfer. The bold header running across the top margin did not read warranty deed or quit claim. The text spelled out a complex legal mechanism known within the escrow industry as an irrevocable generation skipping trust. It was dated a few months prior to my grandmother passing away. I leaned closer to the glowing monitor, the sterile fluorescent lights of the office reflecting off the screen. I traced the scanned typewriter font line by line, translating the dense legal terminology into a devastating reality. My grandmother was the grantor. The designated trustees, the individuals legally appointed to manage the asset, were Sylvia and David Morgan. Below their names, the document listed the sole beneficiaries of the estate, Harper Isabella Morgan and Madison Olivia Morgan. I stopped breathing. The air in the 14th floor office felt thin and inadequate. In the realm of real estate law, a trustee does not own the property they administer. They are fiduciaries bound by strict ethical and legal obligations to hold the asset for the exclusive benefit of the named heirs. Sylvia and David never owned the house. They did not hold a single shred of equity. They were nothing more than glorified caretakers appointed to safeguard the structure for my sister and me. My eyes darted to the specific clauses outlining the duties of the trustees. Article 4, Paragraph 2 detailed the living arrangements. The language was unambiguous and ironclad. The text mandated that the trustees maintain the primary residence as a safe rent-free domicile for the beneficiaries until they reached the age of 25. Rent-free domicile. The words struck my chest like a physical blow. The memory of my 16th birthday surfaced with pristine clarity. The printed invoice sliding across the marble island. $800 a month. Sylvia looking me dead in the eye and declaring, "Nothing in life is free." I remembered the aching blisters on my heels from bussing tables, the smell of stale seafood clinging to my uniform, the exhaustion that blurred my vision during high school geometry. Sylvia had charged a 16-year-old girl extortionate fees to inhabit a bedroom that was legally protected by a binding trust. She acted as a ruthless landlord over a property she did not even own. She treated a minor beneficiary like a desperate tenant fabricating a financial crisis to bleed me dry. But the horror of the document did not end there. A trust of this magnitude requires capital to sustain the physical asset. I scrolled to the addendum searching for the maintenance provisions. A secondary schedule detailed a liquid cash account established alongside the real estate transfer. My grandmother had funded a separate financial ledger specifically intended to cover property taxes, insurance premiums, and structural maintenance for 2 decades. The money to keep the lights on and the roof intact was already there. It had been there since I was a child. I opened a new browser tab, pulling the county tax assessments for the parcel spanning the past 10 years. My fingers moved across the keyboard with frantic precision. I located the annual tax burden for the specific zip code. The yearly bill hovered right around $9,600. $9,600, the exact sum Sylvia demanded from me every year, the exact cost of the down payment for Madison and her shiny silver car. The scope of the crime settled over me, bringing a wave of profound nausea. Sylvia drained the maintenance ledger. She likely spent my grandmother's cash cushion on luxury items, designer clothes, or elaborate vacations long before I reached high school. When the county tax bills inevitably arrived, she possessed no capital to settle the debt. Instead of facing foreclosure and exposing her theft, she turned to her teenage daughter. My grueling shifts at the hotel, my hijacked college fund, the nights I spent shivering in a Walmart parking lot. I was paying the property taxes she embezzled. The custom Italian kitchen tiles were not the only theft. My entire adolescence was a human shield for fiduciary fraud. My vision blurred. The distant ringing of office telephones morphed into a dull roar. I pressed both palms flat against the cool laminate surface of my workstation, trying to anchor my physical body to the room. The betrayal bypassed anger and settled into a hollow, freezing void inside my rib cage. This was not poor parenting. This was not a flawed disciplinary tactic. This was a calculated white-collar crime executed with chilling precision against a child. A warm paper cup touched the back of my hand. I flinched hard, my shoulder knocking against the cubicle partition. Leo stood beside my chair holding 2 fresh cups of dark roast coffee. He noticed the rigid set of my jaw and the unnatural pallor of my skin. He set the cups down quietly. He did not ask generic questions. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the armrest of my chair, his voice low and steady. "What did you find, Harper?" I pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. I could not speak. My throat felt thick with unshed grief. Leo adjusted his dark-framed glasses, leaning closer to read the scanned document. He absorbed the legal terminology with the same analytical processing he utilized for complex security code. His eyes tracked across the rent-free domicile clause and the stipulations regarding the expiration of the fiduciary period. He processed the math the same way I did. He looked down at me, his expression shifting from mild concern to sharp, focused clarity. "You turned 25 3 months ago," Leo whispered. The implication of his words crashed over me, resetting the entire balance of power. The trust stipulated that upon my 25th birthday, the fiduciary administration period officially expired. The title deed mandated an automatic legal transfer. 50% ownership vested immediately to me. The remaining half belonged to Madison. Sylvia and David held 0 equity and possessed 0 authority to encumber the property. They were guests living in my house. I dragged the refinancing request back to the center of my screen. The credit union needed a $200,000 loan secured against the house to fund the Maldives destination wedding. But a federal bank cannot issue a 6-figure mortgage to individuals who do not hold the deed. The underwriting software would flag the ownership discrepancy the moment the file hit the final approval desk. Sylvia could not secure the funds without my explicit, legally notarized signature releasing my equity. This explained the sudden broken silence. The urgent demand for $10,000 followed by the vicious social media smear campaign was a calculated pressure tactic. Sylvia realized the bank required my consent. She was attempting to break me down financially and emotionally, softening the ground before presenting the required paperwork. I clicked on the preliminary application file. This was the initial intake form submitted to the loan officer to initiate the credit inquiry. Standard lending procedure requires all current and future title holders of record to acknowledge the preliminary request. I scrolled to the bottom of the digital document to examine the borrower's signatures. I expected to see two names, David and Sylvia. I expected to see empty lines indicating where they planned to force my compliance. Instead, my blood turned to ice. There were 3 distinct cursive scrolls inked across the digital signature pad. I recognized my father and his messy, sloping letters. I recognized my mother and her sharp, angular script. But it was the third signature sitting clear and legible on the co-borrower line that made the room spin. Whose signature is already on it? The third signature, resting on the bottom of the digital bank application, was executed with elegant looping cursive. I stared at the arrangement of the letters, tracing the familiar handwriting I had seen on birthday cards and high school notebooks. Madison Olivia Morgan. The breath I had been holding exhaled in a slow, uneven rush. My younger sister was not merely a sheltered byproduct of Sylvia and her financial crimes. I had spent years harboring a quiet reservoir of pity for Madison. I assumed she was simply an oblivious child kept insulated on the back porch while I scrubbed dishes and faced eviction. I believed she was a passive recipient of the stolen college funds and the extorted rent money, naive to the mechanics of our mother and her cruelty. That illusion shattered against the glow of my monitor. Madison was 23 years old. She possessed a college degree and a functioning understanding of basic adult responsibilities. By placing her legal signature on a preliminary federal loan application, seeking to encumber a property she knew she did not purchase, she crossed the threshold from shielded golden child to active co-conspirator. She wanted her extravagant Maldives destination wedding. She wanted the luxury cabanas and the private chartered yachts so desperately she was willing to sit beside our mother and sign documents leveraging a house that legally belonged to me. The two of them were attempting to steal my 50% equity to finance a party. The magnitude of the premeditation was staggering. The underwriting process for a home equity line of credit requires applicants to state their relationship to the collateral. Madison knew exactly what she was doing. The deadline for the international resort deposits was rapidly approaching. The vendors required their capital. The bank required the final authorized signatures to release the $200,000, but the automated municipal title search had undoubtedly flagged my name as invested owner now that I had reached my 25th birthday. The credit union loan officer must have informed Sylvia that the transaction could not proceed without my explicit notarized consent. This single administrative hurdle explained the entire sequence of the past few weeks. Sylvia failed to intimidate me into handing over $10,000 in cash. When I blocked her number, she initiated the social media smear campaign, attempting to utilize public shame to force my compliance. But I had remained silent. I did not engage. I did not defend myself to the extended family. My refusal to participate in the digital circus starved her of the emotional leverage she desperately required. The clock was ticking. The bank was waiting. Sylvia was out of options. My mobile phone vibrated on the desk next to my keyboard. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message. I had blocked my mother on my personal device, but the message arrived through a generic web-based texting application. I opened the notification. The tone of the message gave me a profound sense of whiplash. The vicious accusations and the demands for money were entirely absent. Instead, the text read like a script stolen from a daytime television drama. "Harper, I know we have had our differences. Life is too short to carry this bitterness. I miss my eldest daughter. Madison misses her sister. We want to heal our family. Please meet us for dinner tomorrow night. It is time we put the past behind us and move forward together." I read the text twice. A cold, calculated smile formed on my face. Healing. The word was a Trojan horse. She did not want reconciliation. She wanted my signature. The message included a calendar invite for a reservation at a premier oceanfront steakhouse on the Isle of Palms. It was an establishment known for exorbitant prices, white linen tablecloths, and an atmosphere of enforced polite etiquette. Sylvia chose the location with deliberate strategic intent. She knew I despised public scenes. She calculated that surrounded by wealthy tourists and hovering waitstaff, I would revert to the quiet, obedient teenager who avoided causing a scene. She planned to slide a document across the table under the guise of family paperwork, expecting me to sign it blindly just to escape the uncomfortable social pressure. I turned my chair toward Leo. He was still standing beside my cubicle, reading the text message over my shoulder. He pushed his dark-framed glasses up the bridge of his nose. His expression remained a portrait of serene logic. "She thinks you are still 19, Leo said, his voice steady. "She thinks you are still sleeping in that Walmart parking lot." I reached for my mouse. I initiated a secure print command sending the original 1998 irrevocable trust deed, the tax assessment logs, and the fraudulent preliminary loan application to the encrypted laser printer down the hall. "I am going to the dinner," I told him. Leo nodded. He did not attempt to dissuade me. He understood the necessity of closing the loop. "You need to control the environment," he advised. "Let her play her hand. Do not reveal what you know until she commits to the lie on the record." We spent the evening in our apartment meticulously preparing the strategy. The following day, I left the escrow firm early to change my attire. For 5 years, I had navigated the corporate world wearing sensible muted clothing designed to blend into the background. For this specific dinner, I required armor. I selected a tailored navy blue suit cut with sharp, precise lines. I paired it with a crisp white blouse and simple polished leather heels. I pinned my hair back into a severe, immaculate knot. I looked into the hallway mirror. The exhausted girl who smelled of stale shrimp and industrial bleach was gone. Staring back at me was a certified title examiner, a woman who possessed the legal authority to evict her own abusers. I drove my car toward the Isle of Palms. The humid evening air was thick with the scent of salt water and expensive perfume. The lights of the luxury hotels reflected off the damp pavement. I handed my keys to the valet outside the steakhouse, moving with a calm, deliberate rhythm. The glass doors parted and the sound of clinking crystal and muted jazz washed over me. I approached the mahogany host stand. The maitre d' offered a practiced smile, asking for my reservation name. I provided my mother's last name. He grabbed 2 thick, leather-bound menus and gestured for me to follow him through the crowded dining room. We navigated past tables of sunburned executives and laughing couples. I spotted them seated in a curved leather booth near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the dark ocean. Sylvia wore a vibrant silk dress, her hair perfectly styled, projecting the image of a flawless matriarch. David sat beside her, staring down at his ice water, looking thoroughly defeated. Madison was absent. The golden child lacked the fortitude to face the sister she was actively attempting to defraud. I stopped a few feet away from the table, observing them for a brief, silent moment. Sylvia adjusted her diamond earrings, entirely unaware that the entire foundation of her existence had collapsed hours ago on a computer monitor in downtown Charleston. She thought she was reeling in a desperate, estranged daughter. She had no idea she was sitting across from the legal owner of her primary residence. Harper walks into the restaurant knowing she holds the legal keys to her abuser's freedom. How will she spring the trap? The maitre d' pulled the heavy leather chair back, allowing me to take my seat opposite my parents. The ambient noise of the upscale steakhouse provided a chaotic backdrop to the profound silence hovering over our specific booth. Sylvia immediately reached across the crisp white tablecloth. Her hand landed on top of mine. Her skin was warm, and her grip was unsettlingly firm. She squeezed my fingers, performing a pantomime of profound emotional relief. "Harper, my beautiful girl," she murmured, her voice trembling with manufactured sincerity. "Look at you. You look so professional. I have missed you so much." I did not pull my hand away. I allowed her to maintain the physical contact, observing the performance with the clinical detachment of a scientist monitoring a predictable chemical reaction. "Thank you, Sylvia," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. The use of her first name caused a microscopic twitch near the corner of her left eye, but she recovered quickly, burying the irritation beneath a wide, generous smile. David cleared his throat, staring intently at the condensation rolling down his water glass. He had aged significantly over the past 5 years. The lines around his mouth were deeper, and his shoulders carried a permanent slump. He resembled a man who had surrendered his autonomy so completely that he was now merely a passenger in his own life. "Good to see you, kiddo," he mumbled, lifting his eyes for a fraction of a second before quickly looking back down. The waiter arrived, distributing the leather-bound menus and reciting the evening specials. Sylvia dominated the interaction, ordering expensive cuts of dry-aged beef and a highly priced bottle of imported red wine. She spoke rapidly, filling the conversational void with manicured anecdotes about her social club and the minor inconveniences of city traffic. She actively avoided any mention of Madison, the Maldives, or the recent barrage of social media vitriol. It was a masterclass in gaslighting through omission. She was actively painting a reality where the past 5 years of estrangement were simply a minor misunderstanding easily smoothed over with expensive food and pleasant small talk. I ate my dinner methodically. The steak was perfectly cooked, but I registered zero flavor. The concept of dramatic irony is a powerful psychological tool. Knowing the absolute truth while watching someone desperately lie creates a bizarre sense of internal calm. Every bite of food she took, every sip of expensive wine she swallowed, was funded by a financial structure that was actively collapsing around her. She was celebrating a victory she had not secured. She believed my quiet demeanor was a sign of submission. She mistook my observation for compliance. As the waiter cleared our dinner plates and distributed the dessert menus, the atmosphere at the table shifted. The pleasant small talk evaporated, replaced by a sudden focused intensity. Sylvia reached down into her designer handbag, resting on the floor beside her chair. She produced a thin, crisp manila folder. She smoothed the edges with her manicured fingers and placed it directly in the center of the table between the salt shaker and a flickering candle. "I am so glad we are doing this, Harper," she said, her voice dropping an octave, adopting a tone of solemn responsibility. "Your father and I are getting older. We have been working closely with our estate planner to ensure everything is organized for the future. We want to guarantee that you and your sister are protected when we are gone." David suddenly found the architecture of the ceiling incredibly fascinating. He leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms over his chest, physically distancing himself from the folder resting on the table. Sylvia slid the manila envelope a few inches closer to my plate. She unclasped her purse again and withdrew a heavy silver fountain pen, placing it deliberately next to the documents. "It is just some standard administrative paperwork." She continued, her smile tightening around the edges. "We are updating the family will and reorganizing the trust designations. The lawyers require the signatures of all immediate family members just to formalize the changes. It is a tedious formality, really. If you could just sign the bottom of the second page, we can file it tomorrow and put all this legal nonsense behind us." I looked at the silver pen. I looked at the manila folder. The sheer audacity of her execution was breathtaking. She was attempting to execute a hostile takeover of my 50% equity in a crowded steakhouse, positioning federal bank fraud as a tedious administrative errand. I reached forward and picked up the folder. I opened the cover. The document inside was not a last will and testament. It did not contain standard estate planning language. The bold header printed across the top of the crisp white paper read, "Quitclaim Deed." A quitclaim deed is a blunt legal instrument. It contains no warranties and offers no protections. It is designed to instantly sever a person from their legal rights to a piece of real estate, transferring their ownership interest entirely to the receiving party. Sylvia had commissioned a lawyer to draft a document that explicitly relinquished my vested interest in the property, handing total, unencumbered ownership back to her and David. Once my signature was notarized on that page, she could march into the credit union the following morning, secure the $200,000 credit line, and finance the extravagant Maldives wedding using my stolen inheritance. I read the specific paragraph detailing the transfer of rights. I read it slowly, ensuring she understood that I was actually processing the text. I closed the folder. I did not pick up the silver fountain pen. Instead, I slid the entire package into my leather briefcase, resting on the booth seat beside me. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," I said, my voice projecting a bright, cheerful, professional tone. "I appreciate you taking the initiative on the estate planning. Real estate law can be incredibly dense. I will have my firm's senior legal counsel review the clauses first thing tomorrow morning, just to ensure the language aligns with my current financial portfolio. I will let you know when the review is complete." The manufactured warmth vanished from Sylvia's face. The charming matriarch facade shattered, leaving behind a portrait of raw, desperate panic. Her jaw dropped. She lunged forward, her chest pressing against the edge of the table, her hands reaching out as if to physically claw the briefcase away from my side. "You do not need a lawyer to review a simple family document," she hissed, the volume of her voice rising sharply, cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Give that back to me, Harper. You are making this unnecessarily complicated. Sign the paper now. We are your parents. You owe us your cooperation after everything we sacrificed for you." David slammed his hand flat on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "Sylvia, stop!" he muttered, his voice tight with embarrassment. "People are looking." I stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored navy suit, pushing my chair back from the table. I looked down at the woman who had tormented my adolescence. The panic in her eyes was intoxicating. She realized the timeline was slipping out of her control. She knew the destination wedding deposits were due, and the bank was waiting for the ink. "I am a certified title examiner, Sylvia. I do not sign unverified legal instruments in a restaurant booth." I picked up my briefcase, securing the strap over my shoulder. "If you want my signature on this specific document, you will need to present it in a formal setting. Bring David and bring Madison. The three of you can meet me at my escrow firm downtown tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. We can discuss the transfer of equity in my conference room." I turned and walked away from the booth, leaving the expensive bottle of wine half empty and the silver fountain pen abandoned on the white tablecloth. The trap was set. Harper tells Sylvia that if she wants the signature, she must bring the whole family to Harper's escrow firm tomorrow. The final trap is set. What happens when the Morgan family steps into a room designed specifically for forensic truth? The drive from the steakhouse back to my apartment was entirely silent. The rain had stopped, leaving the Charleston streets slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the heavy leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. The quitclaim deed was tucked safely inside, sitting like a loaded weapon. Sylvia believed she had engineered a clever ambush. She did not realize she had willingly handed me the final piece of evidence required to execute her total destruction. I parked my car and rode the elevator to my floor, operating on a surge of cold, focused adrenaline. Leo was sitting at our kitchen island when I unlocked the front door. His laptop was open, multiple terminal windows displaying complex lines of code. He looked up, studying my posture and the sharp, rigid set of my jaw. He closed his laptop immediately. He did not ask how the dinner went. He looked at the briefcase and understood the assignment. The reconnaissance phase was officially over. We were entering full litigation preparation. I placed the briefcase on the kitchen counter and pulled out the manila folder. I set the fraudulent quitclaim deed next to the stacks of paper I had already printed from the escrow firm. The dining table transformed into a staging ground. For the next 5 hours, my living room operated like a forensic accounting war room. This was not a chaotic, emotional breakdown. This was a methodical, clinical assembly of irrefutable facts. The Morgan family utilized invisible psychological warfare. They relied on guilt gaslighting and manufactured obligations. I intended to combat their fluid manipulation with the heaviest, most permanent force available in modern society: documentation. Leo handed me a heavy-duty 3-ring binder. It was solid black, wide enough to hold hundreds of pages. I opened the metal rings with a sharp snap. I began constructing the timeline chronologically. The first section required establishing the baseline of extortion. I accessed the digital scans I had taken from the lockbox hidden under my bed 5 years ago. I printed the handwritten invoices Sylvia had presented to a 16-year-old high school junior, the crude itemized lists demanding $800 a month for a childhood bedroom. I used a 3-hole punch and slid the invoices onto the metal rings. Leo handed me a pack of red adhesive tabs. I labeled the first tab minor extortion. Next, I moved to the financial theft. I pulled the bank ledgers from my paternal grandmother's joint savings account. The transaction history displayed the exact dates and the precise withdrawal amounts where Sylvia bled $18,000 of my tuition money to fund her custom Italian kitchen tiles. The numbers were stark black ink printed on white paper devoid of any emotion or context. They simply stated the mathematical reality of a stolen future. I punched the holes. I slid the ledgers into the binder. I labeled the second red tab fiduciary theft. My mobile phone began to vibrate continuously on the edge of the kitchen counter. The screen illuminated, displaying a rapid succession of incoming text messages. It was Madison. Sylvia had clearly returned from the steakhouse in a state of frantic panic, mobilizing the golden child to apply secondary pressure. I glanced at the glowing screen. The notifications stacked rapidly. "Why are you doing this to me, Harper? Mom said you stole the bank papers at dinner. You are ruining my wedding. The resort needs the deposit by Friday. Stop being a selfish sociopath and sign the damn paperwork." The messages were dripping with desperate entitlement. Madison was operating under the delusion that I was a malicious obstacle blocking her rightful access to luxury. She believed the narrative Sylvia had carefully constructed. I did not reply. I did not feel the urge to correct her through a text message. Arguing through a digital screen is a surrender of power. It allows the abuser to dictate the terms of engagement from a safe distance. I muted the device, placing it face down next to the coffee maker. Madison would receive her answers in person. I returned to the table. The third section of the binder required the introduction of the real estate mechanics. I picked up the printed copies of the 1998 County Archives, the Irrevocable Generation-Skipping Trust. I highlighted the specific clause defining the property as a rent-free domicile for the beneficiaries. I highlighted the fiduciary expiration clause, triggering the transfer of equity upon my 25th birthday. I added the municipal tax assessments, proving the annual property tax burden precisely matched the $9,600 Sylvia had extorted from my teenage wages. This was the structural core of the case. It proved Sylvia never owned the house she claimed to rule. I punched the holes. I secured the heavy stack of legal records. I labeled the third red tab, Trust Embezzlement. The final section was the kill shot. I took the fraudulent preliminary home equity line of credit application I had pulled from my work terminal, the federal banking document seeking a $200,000 loan against my property. I placed it side by side with the quitclaim deed Sylvia had slid across the white tablecloth at the restaurant. Together, these two documents represented a coordinated, premeditated attempt to strip a legal owner of their vested equity to fund a personal vanity project. Furthermore, the preliminary application bore the unmistakable looping cursive signature of Madison Olivia Morgan, proving the golden child was an active, willing participant in the federal wire fraud. I placed the documents into the binder, closing the heavy metal rings with a final resonant click. I labeled the fourth and final red tab, Attempted Bank Fraud. The binder sat in the center of the kitchen island. It was thick, heavy, and ominous. It represented the physical manifestation of my entire trauma, bound, sorted, and categorized into an undeniable legal narrative. Sylvia could argue with a memory. She could dispute an emotion. She could manipulate a conversation. She could not argue with municipal tax codes, forged signatures, and stamped federal banking applications. Leo placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You built a prosecution," he murmured, looking down at the red tabs extending from the black edges. "They are going to walk into that room expecting a negotiation. You are bringing a firing squad." I looked at the black binder. I felt a profound sense of calm settle deep within my chest. The terrified teenager who slept in the discount store parking lot was permanently gone. I was a certified title examiner. I operated in a world governed by facts, logic, and consequences. My family had spent a decade operating in the shadows, relying on my silence to sustain their illusions. I was about to expose them to the harshest light possible. I managed exactly 3 hours of sleep. I woke before the alarm showered and dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer and matching slacks. I secured my hair, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. I drank a cup of black coffee, placed the heavy black binder into my leather briefcase, and drove toward the financial district. The sun broke over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the Charleston streets. The rain from the previous evening had scrubbed the air clean, leaving the morning feeling sharp and vivid. I arrived at the escrow firm early, bypassing the crowded employee break room and walking directly to the executive conference room situated at the far end of the floor. The space was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the harbor. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 12 ergonomic leather chairs. I took my seat at the head of the table, facing the double glass doors. I placed my briefcase on the floor. I pulled the black binder out and set it directly in front of me, aligning the edges perfectly parallel with the edge of the mahogany wood. Leo arrived shortly after carrying a tablet and taking a seat quietly in the corner of the room, observing the entrance. The digital clock on the wall shifted to 8:55. I sat perfectly still, resting my hands flat against the cool surface of the binder. The elevator chime echoed down the long carpeted hallway. Heavy footsteps approached. The glass doors swung open. The sun rises. Harper sits in the glass-walled conference room as her family steps off the elevator. It is time. The heavy glass doors of the executive conference room swung open with a soft pneumatic hiss. The Morgan family stepped onto the plush corporate carpet, bringing the chaotic energy of their house directly into my professional sanctuary. They looked severely out of place against the backdrop of the Charleston harbor and the sleek modern furniture. Sylvia led the procession. She wore a tailored linen dress and oversized sunglasses pushed back atop her perfectly styled hair. Her chin was elevated, projecting an aura of arrogant entitlement. She scanned the room dismissively, evaluating the expensive mahogany table and the sweeping ocean view with a sneer of calculated, unimpressed judgment. She intended to dominate the space, treating my workplace as an extension of her own living room. Madison followed closely behind her. The golden child was 23 years old, but she possessed the petulant posture of a teenager, denied a weekend privilege. She clutched a designer handbag, gripping the leather straps so tightly her knuckles were white. She directed a blistering glare toward me. Her eyes narrowed, conveying a mixture of intense irritation and victimized self-righteousness. She was the bride whose luxury fantasy had been temporarily delayed, and she fully expected me to grovel for inconveniencing her schedule. David brought up the rear. He shuffled into the room looking more spectral than human. He wore a faded polo shirt and slacks that hung slightly loose on his frame. He did not look at me. He did not look at the view. He focused his gaze entirely on the baseboards, choosing a chair near the corner of the table, effectively attempting to minimize his physical footprint. He was a man who had long ago mastered the art of becoming invisible during a conflict. Sylvia did not wait for an invitation to sit. She pulled out the leather chair directly across the table from me, dropping her expensive purse onto the floor with a heavy thud. She crossed her legs, leaning forward, resting her elbows aggressively on the polished wood. Madison took the seat beside her, crossing her arms defensively. Leo remained seated quietly in the corner near the window. His presence was a silent anchor, his calm demeanor acting as a direct counterweight to the frantic energy radiating from the opposite side of the table. Sylvia glanced at him briefly, dismissing him entirely as irrelevant background noise. She refocused her attention solely on me. Her eyes dropped to the heavy black binder resting perfectly aligned in front of my folded hands. "You certainly enjoy the theatrics, Harper," Sylvia began, her voice dripping with condescension. "Demanding we drive all the way downtown just to sign a piece of paper. This is a working day. We are busy people. The lawyers are waiting for the final documents so we can proceed with the family estate updates." She extended an open palm across the table, her fingers twitching with impatient expectation. "Hand me the folder. We need to get this filed before the banks close for the weekend." I did not move. I maintained my posture, keeping my hands folded, resting on top of this black binder. I looked at her extended palm and then slowly raised my eyes to meet her gaze. "I told you last night, Sylvia," I said, my voice dropping to a low, even register. "I am a certified title examiner. I do not sign unverified legal instruments." I pushed the manila folder containing the quitclaim deed across the smooth mahogany surface. It slid silently, stopping exactly 2 inches from her extended fingertips. "The document is unsigned." The atmosphere in the room crystallized. The ambient hum of the central air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Sylvia stared at the manila folder, her hand slowly retracting. The arrogant facade fractured, replaced by a sudden venomous fury. The realization that her carefully constructed ambush had failed ignited a deep, primal rage. She slapped her palm flat against the table. "How dare you?" she hissed, the volume of her voice escalating sharply, echoing off the glass walls. "After everything we have done for you, after the sacrifices we made to keep a roof over your head and food in your stomach, you arrogant, ungrateful child. We offer you the opportunity to participate in the family planning, and you repay us with this selfish, dramatic stunt. You are jeopardizing your sister's future. You are holding our lives hostage because you are bitter about a high school curfew." Madison chimed in, leaning forward, her voice rising in a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You are ruining my wedding, Harper. The Maldives resort needs the final wire transfer by tomorrow afternoon. If they do not receive the funds, they cancel the cabana reservations. I am not losing my dream wedding because you want to play a power game in your fancy office. Sign the paper. Stop being a sociopath." I let them talk. I did not interrupt. I did not raise a hand in defense. I sat perfectly still, allowing the barrage of guilt manipulation and manufactured outrage to wash over me. In the past, this synchronized attack would have triggered a severe panic response. I would have folded under the immense pressure, desperate to stop the yelling and restore the fragile peace. But observing them from the opposite end of the mahogany table, the entire performance appeared remarkably pathetic. They were operating from a playbook that was catastrophically obsolete. They were firing emotional blanks at a target encased in Kevlar. Sylvia reached the crescendo of her monologue. "If you do not sign that document right now, Harper, you can consider yourself permanently severed from this family. We will walk out those glass doors, and you will never hear from us again. We will not invite you to the wedding. We will not acknowledge you. You will be entirely alone." The threat of abandonment is the ultimate weapon in the arsenal of a toxic parent. She delivered the ultimatum with absolute certainty, believing the sheer terror of isolation would finally break my resolve. She finished her sentence, chest heaving, slightly glaring at me, expecting the inevitable surrender. The room fell silent. I waited 5 full seconds, allowing the weight of her threat to settle into the corporate stillness. I unclasped my hands. I reached out and touched the cool metal spine of the black binder. "You did not bring me here to sign a will, Mom," I said, my voice stripped of all emotion, cold and clinical as a surgeon's scalpel. "You brought me here to commit federal bank fraud." Sylvia flinched. The word fraud hung in the air, a jagged foreign object introduced into her carefully sanitized vocabulary. David finally lifted his head, his eyes widening in sudden alarm. Madison stopped glaring, her expression shifting into a mask of total confusion. I grasped the edge of the heavy black cover. With a single fluid motion, I flipped the binder open, revealing the meticulously organized stacks of paper, separated by bright red adhesive tabs. The metal rings gleamed under the recessed lighting. The shift in power was instantaneous, pulling the oxygen directly out of the room. The transition from a chaotic family argument to a forensic legal prosecution was complete. I flipped past the first section, moving directly to the core structural foundation of the case. My fingers found the third red tab labeled Trust Embezzlement. I pulled out a crisp, freshly printed copy of the county archive record from 1998. I slid the document across the mahogany table, pushing it directly next to the unsigned quitclaim deed. I looked Sylvia dead in the eye, holding her gaze with terrifying intensity. "Let us discuss the sacrifices you made to keep a roof over my head," I said. I tapped the center of the archive document with my index finger, highlighting the bold printed header. "This is an irrevocable generation-skipping trust executed by grandmother shortly before she died." Sylvia stared at the paper. The color drained from her face rapidly, leaving her skin a sickly pale gray. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound emerged. She recognized the format. She recognized the signatures. She realized instantly that the central pillar of her 10-year illusion had just been atomized. I continued, my voice echoing with unrelenting precision. "The trust clearly dictates that the property is a rent-free domicile intended exclusively for the beneficiaries. You and David are designated solely as trustees, fiduciaries tasked with managing the asset. You possess zero equity. You hold zero ownership rights." I leaned forward, closing the distance across the table. "You never owned the house, Sylvia. I do." The silence that followed was absolute. The glass-walled conference room designed for high-stakes corporate negotiations had never witnessed a hostile takeover quite this personal. The illusion of the powerful matriarch commanding her domain was dead. What remained was a cornered criminal staring down the barrel of her own documented history. Harper opens the binder. How will Sylvia react when her 10-year illusion is shattered by federal documents? The revelation detonated in the center of the mahogany table. The irrevocable trust document sat pristine and undeniable under the recessed lighting. Sylvia stared at the bold printed text, her eyes darting frantically across the paragraphs, searching for a loophole, a typo, an escape hatch that did not exist. The 10-year illusion, the carefully cultivated narrative of the sacrificial matriarch commanding her domain, evaporated instantly. She was no longer a dominant landlord. She was an exposed fiduciary who had been caught red-handed. David slumped forward, burying his face deep into his calloused hands. A low, ragged groan escaped his lips, sounding like a man who had finally been crushed by a weight he had carried in secret for decades. Madison remained frozen, her brow furrowed in utter confusion. The legal terminology, the concept of a trust, the sudden collapse of her mother's authority, it was a foreign language she lacked the capacity to translate. Sylvia recovered her voice, utilizing sheer desperate denial. "This is absurd," and she stammered, her manicured fingernails scraping nervously against the edge of the unsigned quitclaim deed. "You printed a fake document. You are trying to intimidate us with legal jargon. We paid the mortgage. We maintained the property. We raised you in that house." I did not raise my voice to match her panic. I turned the page in the heavy black binder, moving to the first red tab, Minor Extortion. "There was no mortgage," I stated calmly, reading from the municipal property records. "The house was owned free and clear by grandmother before it was placed into the trust. The only carrying costs were annual property taxes and standard maintenance, both of which were fully funded by a secondary cash ledger established at the time of the transfer." I pulled out the first piece of paper from the minor extortion section. It was the original handwritten invoice from my 16th birthday, the crude itemized list demanding $800 a month. I slid it across the table, aligning it perfectly next to the trust document. I was a minor. I continued my tone, flat and relentless. I was a designated beneficiary of the trust. You were legally obligated to provide a rent-free domicile. Instead, you fabricated a financial crisis. You charged a high school junior extortionate fees to live in her own legally protected residence. Over the course of 3 years before you evicted me in trash bags, you collected precisely $28,800 in cash. Sylvia scoffed a harsh, defensive sound that lacked any real conviction. "That is ancient history, Harper. You lived under our roof. You consumed our food. You contributed to the household expenses like a responsible adult. It builds character. You are obsessing over old resentments instead of focusing on the present." I turned to the second red tab, Fiduciary Theft. I extracted the bank transaction logs from the drained college savings account. I placed them side by side with the handwritten rent invoice, $18,000. I read, tracing the line items with my pen. "You systematically drained a joint savings account designated explicitly for my university tuition. You utilized those funds to purchase custom-engraved Italian ceramic tiles for a kitchen remodel. When the annual property tax bills arrived, you possessed no capital in the trust ledger because you had already embezzled the maintenance funds. You replaced the stolen tax capital with the $28,800 you extorted from my teenage wages." The color drained entirely from Sylvia's face, leaving her complexion a stark, chalky white. The reality of the audit was setting in. I was not arguing emotions. I was establishing a chronological forensic timeline of financial crimes. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the binder. Under the South Carolina Code of Laws, Title 16 Offenses Against Property, what you committed is classified as theft by deception and fiduciary embezzlement. Furthermore, by attempting to secure a line of credit using a property you do not own, you are currently engaging in attempted federal wire fraud. The legal terminology struck the table like physical blows. Embezzlement, wire fraud, theft by deception. These were not family arguments. These were felony classifications carrying severe mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Sylvia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. "I did what I had to do for the family," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying mixture of self-justification and raw panic. "You have no idea the pressure we were under. The cost of living is astronomical. We wanted to maintain a certain standard of life. We wanted to provide a good home. You are twisting the facts to make us look like criminals. We are your parents. You are a trustee who stole from a minor beneficiary." I corrected her smoothly, shutting down the emotional pivot. "The fiduciary period officially expired on my 25th birthday. 3 months ago, the title automatically vested. I now hold 50% legal equity in the property. You possess 0 ownership. Therefore, I am the only individual in this room with the legal authority to encumber the asset." Sylvia's eyes darted toward the briefcase resting on the floor. She realized instantly why the quitclaim deed was so vital. The credit union underwriting software had flagged my name as an owner of record. The bank required my notarized signature to release the $200,000. The entire steakhouse charade, the fake estate planning, the manufactured maternal warmth. It was all a desperate, frantic attempt to steal my equity before I discovered the existence of the trust. She opened her mouth, attempting to formulate another defense, another lie, another manipulation to regain control of the narrative. I did not give her the opportunity. The architect had been dismantled. The foundation of her authority was reduced to a pile of incriminating documents. It was time to address the secondary layer of the Morgan family dynamic. I slowly shifted my gaze away from Sylvia. I looked directly across the mahogany table, locking eyes with the golden child. Madison sat rigid, her arms crossed defensively, still attempting to process the rapid destruction of her mother. She believed she was a passive spectator in this conflict, an innocent bride whose luxury wedding was being unfairly delayed by a bitter older sister. She was profoundly mistaken. I turned to the 4th and final red tab in the black binder. Attempted bank fraud. I extracted a crisp color copy of the preliminary home equity line of credit application, the document submitted to the credit union detailing the $200,000 loan request. I slid the application slowly across the polished wood. I pushed it past the trust document, past the college fund ledgers, stopping it directly in front of Madison. "Look at the bottom of the second page, Madison," I instructed, my voice echoing in the quiet conference room. "Look at the borrower signature line." Madison uncrossed her arms. She leaned forward hesitantly, her eyes dropping to the document. She saw her own name printed clearly in the borrower identification field. She saw the elegant looping cursive she had applied to the digital signature pad just a few days prior. "You wanted the Maldives destination wedding," I said, the clinical detachment in my voice cutting through her confusion. "You wanted the luxury cabanas and the private chartered yachts. You wanted them so desperately that you sat next to Sylvia and willingly signed a federal banking application, attempting to leverage a property you knew you did not purchase." Madison blinked rapidly, looking from the application to Sylvia and back again. "Mom said it was just a formality," she stammered, her voice tight with rising panic. "She said we just needed a co-signer to lower the interest rate. She said the house belonged to her and Dad." I tapped the irrevocable trust document resting on the table. "The house belongs to me, and as of 3 months ago, it belongs to you as well. We are equal 50% beneficiaries. But by signing that loan application attempting to secure funds against my half of the equity without my consent, you crossed a very dangerous legal line." The implication hung heavily in the air. Madison wasn't just a spoiled, oblivious golden child. She was an active co-conspirator. She knowingly signed federal documents attempting to leverage her sister's stolen equity to fund her destination wedding. The protective bubble Sylvia had maintained around her youngest daughter instantly popped, exposing Madison to the harsh, unforgiving reality of legal consequence. Harper slides the fraudulent HELOC application toward Madison. It is time for the golden child to pay the piper. How will the toxic alliance between the architect and the favored daughter hold up when the threat of federal prosecution enters the room? The looping cursive signature resting at the bottom of the federal banking application acted as a lit fuse. Madison stared at her own handwriting, the realization of her exposure slowly seeping through her initial confusion. The protective insulation she had enjoyed her entire life, the luxury, the excuses, the shielded reality was evaporating. She was no longer just the favored daughter planning a lavish destination wedding. She was a documented participant in a conspiracy to defraud a financial institution. "Mom told me it was fine," Madison whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes darted wildly between the loan application and Sylvia. "She said it was just paperwork to release the wedding funds. I didn't know about any trust. I didn't know about the rent money." "Ignorance of the law is not a recognized offense in a federal indictment," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "The credit union underwriting department does not care about family dynamics." "Madison, they care about verified equity. You signed a document claiming legal authority to encumber a property to secure $200,000 of property where 50% of the vested ownership belongs exclusively to me." Sylvia scrambled to regain control of the narrative. Her face flushed a deep mottled crimson. She reached out, attempting to grab Madison's forearm. "Do not listen to her, Maddie," Sylvia urged, her voice adopting a frantic, soothing cadence. "She is twisting the facts. She is trying to manipulate you. We did this for your future for the wedding. Harper is just bitter because she chose to abandon this family." "I did not abandon this family," I countered, my voice cutting cleanly through Sylvia's desperate deflection. "I was evicted in heavy-duty trash bags because a corporate payroll glitch delayed a $1,000 extortion payment by 48 hours. I turned back to the black binder, pulling a small stack of meticulously organized receipts from the back pocket. I laid them out sequentially, forming a physical timeline of the Morgan family economy. "Let us review the exact source of your future, Madison." I pointed to the first receipt. "This is the down payment record for your $22,000 silver Honda Civic. The transaction date is exactly 1 week after I handed Sylvia the final installment of a year-long rental extortion scheme." I pointed to the second receipt. "This is a credit card statement detailing the purchase of your designer graduation dress and the luxury catering for your open house party. The transaction date aligns flawlessly with the week Sylvia finalized the embezzlement of the annual property tax fund from grandmother's trust ledger." I slid the bank application forward, slightly emphasizing the $200,000 request. "And this is the grand finale. The Maldives destination wedding, the luxury cabanas, the private chartered yachts. You believed you were entitled to an elite lifestyle because Sylvia convinced you the family possessed wealth. You were living in a fantasy funded entirely by theft. Your car, your clothes, your education, your upcoming wedding, they were all subsidized by my teenage wages and the systematic draining of my legal inheritance. Your entire privileged existence is a crime scene." The fragile alliance between the architect and the golden child shattered in real time. Madison recoiled, pulling her arms sharply away from Sylvia's grasp. The expression on her face contorted from panicked confusion into raw, visceral fury. The realization that her pristine image was built on a foundation of severe abuse inflicted upon her sister was devastating. But the far more terrifying realization was the personal legal jeopardy she now faced. "You lied to me!" Madison screamed, the volume of her voice spiking sharply, echoing off the glass conference room walls. She shoved her chair back, the metal legs scraping harshly against the corporate carpet. "You told me Dad got a bonus. You told me the trust was empty. You made me sign that bank paper claiming it was just a standard co-signer form. You implicated me in bank fraud to pay for a wedding." "Maddie, please," Sylvia pleaded, her voice cracking, losing the polished, aristocratic edge she usually maintained. "We can fix this. The lawyer said the quitclaim deed would resolve the title issue. Once Harper signs it, the bank will release the money and everything goes back to normal." Madison stood up, pointing a trembling finger at the spread of documents resting on the mahogany table. "Nothing is normal, Mom. You stole from her. You stole the house from us. And now my name is sitting on a fraudulent application in a federal credit union database. If they investigate this, my career is over. My fiancé will cancel the wedding. You ruined my life." The loss of Madison's compliance was the final structural collapse for Sylvia. The matriarch thrives on control, leveraging one child against the other, maintaining power through division. With Madison actively turning against her, the system was irreparably broken. The desperation morphed rapidly into blind, reckless aggression. Sylvia lunged forward. She threw her upper body across the wide mahogany table, her manicured hands grasping frantically for the heavy black binder. She intended to physically seize the evidence, destroy the printed archives and the bank ledgers, believing that removing the physical paper would somehow erase the digital footprint she had created. Leo moved with astonishing speed. He had been sitting silently in the corner observing the escalation, but the moment Sylvia broke the physical plane of the table, he intervened. He stepped forward and placed his large hand firmly over the center of the binder, pinning it securely to the polished wood. He did not yell. He did not exhibit anger. He simply applied immovable physical force. "I strongly advise against tampering with legal evidence." Leo stated his voice a low, calm rumble that reverberated with absolute authority. Sylvia froze. She looked up at Leo, her arms stretched across the table, her hands hovering inches from the red adhesive tabs. She recognized the immovable nature of his posture. The physical intimidation tactics she utilized on a teenage girl in a southern kitchen were entirely ineffective against a grown man in a corporate boardroom. She slowly retracted her arms, sliding back into her leather chair, her chest heaving with exertion and suppressed rage. I did not blink. I maintained my clinical detachment, allowing the adrenaline of the physical confrontation to dissipate into the quiet hum of the air conditioning. I reached over Leo's arm and gently closed the cover of the black binder, sealing the records back inside. "The quitclaim deed is unsigned," I announced, ensuring my voice carried clearly across the room. "I will not be surrendering my 50% equity in the property. Furthermore, as a certified title examiner functioning within this jurisdiction, I possess an ethical and legal obligation to report suspicious activity." I paused, allowing the weight of the next sentence to settle. "Yesterday afternoon, immediately following our dinner, I submitted a formal fraud alert to the Regional Credit Union Underwriting Department. I attached a copy of the 1998 Irrevocable Trust and flagged the ownership discrepancy." Sylvia gasped a sharp intake of air that sounded painfully dry. David, who had remained buried in his hands, finally looked up, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "The $200,000 home equity line of credit is officially dead." I continued, stating the fact with the finality of a gavel striking a block. "The bank has frozen the application. The funds will not be dispersed. The Maldives destination wedding is canceled. You possess zero capital to fulfill the resort deposits." The magnitude of the defeat was total. The money was gone. The illusion of wealth was destroyed. The legal exposure was documented and verified. The Morgan family sat in the glass-walled conference room, stripped of their leverage, their secrecy, and their dignity. They were cornered, possessing no escape routes and zero bargaining power. With their money gone and their crimes exposed, Harper delivers her devastating final ultimatum. How does a survivor structure the punishment for a decade of systemic abuse when she holds the absolute authority to dictate the terms of surrender? The silence inside the executive conference room stretched into a suffocating vacuum. The ambient hum of the central air conditioning was the only sound permitted to exist. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, observing the varying stages of grief and panic washing over the faces of my family members. The illusion of their authority had been systematically unraveled, leaving them exposed to the unforgiving glare of documented truth. They possessed no leverage. They held no collateral. They were cornered. I rested my hands on the black binder. The time for debate was over. The forensic audit was complete. It was time to issue the final invoice. "You have two choices moving forward," I announced, my voice projecting a calm, unyielding authority. "Option A involves a comprehensive escalation of this file. I will take this binder directly to the Charleston Police Department and file a formal report for theft by deception and fiduciary embezzlement. Simultaneously, I will forward the fraudulent loan application to the federal authorities and the Internal Revenue Service." I paused, ensuring my eyes met each of theirs in sequence. "The IRS will audit every single financial transaction you executed over the last decade," I continued. "They will discover the drained college funds. They will trace the missing annual property tax capital. David, you will lose your corporate pension to pay the restitution. Sylvia, you will face mandatory minimum sentencing for wire fraud. Madison, your pristine professional record will carry a permanent felony flag for your signature on that bank document. The Maldives destination wedding will be replaced by endless court appearances and crippling legal fees. Madison let out a stifled sob, pressing her hands over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with genuine terror. She looked at our parents, silently begging them to fix the catastrophic disaster they had engineered. Option B, I said, holding up a single finger, is a clean surrender. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the edge of the table. You and David will vacate the property within 30 days. You will pack your personal belongings, leave the keys on the kitchen counter, and surrender the house to the rightful beneficiaries of the trust. You will walk away from the asset you attempted to steal. If you agree to these terms and leave without causing any structural damage to the property, I will seal this binder. The authorities will not receive a phone call. The terms of surrender were explicit. Give up the house or lose your freedom, Sylvia snapped. The realization that she was being evicted from the very domain she used to control and torment me was too profound a humiliation to bear quietly. She stood up her chair, scraping violently against the carpet. Her hands were shaking, and her carefully styled hair was beginning to unravel. "You cannot do this to us, Harper!" She screamed, tears of raw fury spilling over her eyelashes. "Where are we supposed to go? We do not have the savings to rent an apartment in this housing market. You are throwing your own parents out onto the street. We sacrificed everything to keep this family afloat. Nothing in life is free." The phrase hung in the air. Nothing in life is free, the exact words she weaponized on my 16th birthday to justify extortion. She invoked the phrase out of sheer desperation, hoping to trigger some latent reservoir of daughterly guilt. She chose the wrong weapon. I reached down and opened the black binder. I flipped to the first red tab. I carefully extracted the original handwritten invoice from 9 years ago, the itemized list demanding $800 a month for rent, utilities, and groceries. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, but the blue ink remained perfectly legible. I slid the faded invoice across the mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of her. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, chilling register. "Nothing in life is free." I tapped the surface of the old invoice. I checked the current real estate listings for the neighborhood this morning. Fair market value for a 3-bedroom property in that zip code is currently $3,500 a month. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. "If you wish to remain in my house, you will sign a formal commercial lease agreement today. The rent is $3,500 due on the 1st of every month. Pay up or get out." The poetic justice of the moment was absolute. I had taken her favorite weapon, her defining philosophy, and turned it into a legal guillotine. The extortion she normalized was now the exact metric of her ruin. Sylvia stared at the old invoice, her mouth opening and closing, but she could not formulate a response. The fight drained out of her body, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. She looked at David, her eyes silently pleading for him to intervene, to assert some patriarchal authority and rescue them from the trap. David looked at the invoice. He looked at the thick black binder. He looked at me. The ghostly enabler who had spent decades avoiding conflict finally recognized that silence would no longer provide a shield. He placed his hand on Sylvia's arm, pressing downward, forcing her to sit back in her chair. "We will leave," David said, his voice raspy and thin. "We will pack our things. You will have the keys in 30 days. Sylvia let out a wounded gasp, but she did not argue. The patriarch had surrendered, capitulating to the overwhelming force of documented evidence. The meeting was adjourned. The following 30 days were a masterclass in strict boundary enforcement. I did not visit the house. I did not answer phone calls. I hired a local property management attorney to handle the formal eviction notices, ensuring every step of the departure was documented through certified mail. The transition of power was handled with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger. On the 30th day, the humid Charleston sun beat down relentlessly on the suburban pavement. Leo and I pulled into the driveway of the property in his reliable sedan. Parked near the front lawn in the exact spot where the heavy-duty contractor trash bags had once held my entire life sat a rented box truck. The front door was propped open. The interior of the house echoed with the hollow sound of empty rooms. I stood on the sidewalk watching the final stages of the exodus. David was carrying a faded armchair down the concrete steps, his shirt soaked with perspiration. He looked 10 years older, his posture bent under the weight of his own failure. He saw me standing near the curb, but he quickly averted his eyes, focusing entirely on the loading ramp of the truck. Sylvia emerged from the hallway. She was not wearing silk or diamonds. She wore stained sweatpants and a loose cotton shirt. Her face was devoid of makeup, revealing the deep, exhausted lines framing her mouth. She was carrying a heavy, reinforced cardboard box wrapped tightly in packing tape. The box looked cumbersome, requiring her to lean backward slightly to balance the weight. As she walked down the porch steps, a distinct clinking sound echoed from inside the cardboard. It was the heavy, unmistakable rattle of ceramic shifting against ceramic. I stepped forward, blocking the pathway to the moving truck. Sylvia stopped gripping the heavy box, her eyes darting nervously toward Leo, who had positioned himself quietly near the bumper of my car. "What is in the box, Sylvia?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral but firm. She tightened her grip, her knuckles turning white. "Just some leftover kitchen supplies," she muttered, refusing to make eye contact. "Spare plates and some old serving dishes. Nothing important. Please move Harper. It is heavy." I did not move. I reached out and grabbed the top flap of the cardboard box. The packing tape was applied hastily, leaving a loose edge. I pulled the tape back with a sharp ripping sound, tearing the cardboard open. Inside, resting in neat, heavy stacks, were the custom-fired Italian ceramic tiles. The intricate palmetto and crescent moon patterns shimmered under the bright Carolina sun. These were the surplus pieces from the extensive kitchen remodel, the remodel funded entirely by the $18,000 she had drained from my grandmother's joint savings account. She was attempting to smuggle the expensive materials out of the house, likely intending to sell them to a local contractor for quick cash. I looked from the beautiful tiles up to her exhausted face. "You bought these with my college tuition," I stated, the fact hanging heavily in the humid air. Sylvia swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the moving truck. "They were extra," she whispered defensively. "They have been sitting in the garage for years. You do not even need them. We need the money, Harper." I placed my hands on the edges of the box. Under real estate law, any materials purchased for the improvement of the physical structure are legally classified as fixtures of the property. I pressed the cardboard flaps back down, sealing the top. "These tiles belong to the trust. They are legally my property." I pulled the box from her hands. It was incredibly heavy, but the weight felt profoundly satisfying. I set the cardboard down onto the concrete porch. "Leave them," I commanded, my voice echoing with finality. Sylvia stood on the driveway, her empty hands trembling slightly at her sides. The final indignity was complete. She could not even salvage the leftover scraps of her own theft. She turned around, walking toward the passenger side of the rented moving truck. With her head bowed, David secured the rear door, pulling the heavy metal latch down with a loud, definitive clang. They climbed into the cab, the engine sputtering to life, and slowly drove away from the curb. I stood on the driveway watching the box truck disappear around the corner of the suburban street. The house was quiet. The deed was secure. The abusers were gone, evicted and penniless. What is the ultimate fate of the family that treated a daughter like an ATM? The box truck driving away from the curb marked the final physical interaction I ever had with my parents. But the consequences of their actions continued to multiply long after the exhaust fumes cleared the neighborhood. When I submitted the formal fraud alert to the Regional Credit Union Underwriting Department, I initiated a severe chain reaction within the Charleston financial sector. Federal banking systems are deeply interconnected. A flagged application for attempted wire fraud does not simply vanish when the loan is denied. It attaches itself to a Social Security number, acting as a permanent glaring warning sign to any institution running a background check. Sylvia and David needed a place to live. Charleston is an unforgiving real estate market for individuals boasting pristine backgrounds and substantial capital. For a couple carrying a recent fraud alert and zero verifiable equity, finding a landlord willing to hand over a set of keys proved to be an insurmountable hurdle. They attempted to secure luxury condominiums on King Street. Clinging to the desperate hope that they could maintain their elite social facade, they received swift rejections. They lowered their expectations, applying for modest garden apartments in the distant suburbs. The automated background checks returned the same fatal results. The illusion of the wealthy matriarch was fractured beyond repair, and the local economy treated her with the exact cold indifference she once showed her teenage daughter. Devoid of options and possessing limited cash reserves, they were forced to enact their only remaining contingency plan. They moved into Madison's apartment. My younger sister occupied a cramped one-bedroom unit on the second floor of an older building situated near the university campus. The square footage was barely sufficient for a single young professional. Suddenly, the tiny space housed 3 adults. The elaborate destination wedding in the Maldives evaporated along with the deposit money Sylvia had promised. Madison's fiancé, a junior executive who valued his own pristine public image, recognized the severe legal jeopardy and the sudden influx of destitute future in-laws. He quietly broke the engagement, packed his belongings, and relocated to the West Coast. The poetic justice of their new living situation was exquisite. Sylvia, the architect of the systemic abuse, and Madison, the willing beneficiary, were now trapped together in a tiny, unair-conditioned box. The golden child, who once felt entitled to chartered yachts and custom designer dresses, was now sleeping on a thin, convertible sofa, while her parents occupied her only bedroom. The toxic alliance that thrived on my exploitation quickly cannibalized itself. Without my wages to steal or my grandmother's trust ledger to embezzle, they possessed no external resources to drain. They were left with nothing but each other and the mounting pressure of their shared suffocating failure. I did not need to exact any further revenge. I simply allowed the natural consequences of their own greed to construct their permanent prison. Back on my old street, Leo and I assumed full administrative control of the property. We did not move our own belongings into the house. The structure held too many ghosts, too many echoes of typed invoices and midnight trash bag evictions. Instead, we treated the residence exactly as my grandmother intended. We treated it as a financial asset. We hired a professional cleaning crew to scrub away the lingering traces of Sylvia and her lavender perfume. We utilized the remaining custom Italian ceramic tiles to finish a secondary bathroom project, maximizing the property value using the very materials purchased with my stolen tuition funds. The irony of completing the renovation on my own terms provided a quiet, profound satisfaction. We listed the house on the premium rental market. Within 2 weeks, a young military family signed a standard commercial lease. I managed the paperwork with the same clinical precision I applied to my daily escrow files. Every month, a direct deposit cleared into a secure joint account, split evenly between a structural maintenance fund and a high-yield savings ledger. I did not charge the new tenants a manufactured grocery tax. I did not demand untraceable cash stuffed inside a white envelope. I operated as an ethical fiduciary, honoring the legal structure my grandmother designed so many years ago. I broke the cycle of extortion and replaced it with genuine professional integrity. I often find myself standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in my downtown office, looking out over the harbor holding a warm cup of dark roast coffee. I think about the 19-year-old girl who slept in the driver's seat of a rusted Toyota sedan parked under the glaring fluorescent lights of a Walmart supercenter. I remember the cold terror of homelessness gripping her chest. I remember the weight of the canvas duffel bag containing the small, fireproof lockbox. She believed she was fighting a losing battle against a towering, untouchable authority figure. She did not know that the scattered receipts and the copied bank ledgers she collected in the dark would eventually become the precise instruments of her liberation. Family trauma thrives in the shadows. Emotional manipulation relies on the victim questioning their own memory. But documents do not lie. A printed municipal tax assessment does not gaslight you. A county archive deed does not hurl insults or demand apologies. The truth, when properly tabulated and stored inside a heavy black binder, becomes an immovable fortress. I survived my household by learning to speak the language of forensic reality. I stopped arguing with their fiction and started auditing their facts. The transition from a scared teenager to a victorious professional required me to view my own life through the lens of a legal examiner. Welcome to the conclusion of this episode on Elena Vengeance. My name is Harper Morgan. I am 28 years old, and I am the undisputed legal owner of my own life. I reclaimed my peace by refusing to participate in a system designed to break me down for spare parts. If you are listening to this and recognizing the distinct contours of your own household dynamic, pay close attention. Do not attempt to win a screaming match with people who view your existence as a transaction. If your family treats you like a line item on their balance sheet, stop paying. Build your binder. Secure your future. Gather your evidence in silence. Organize your timeline. Wait for the perfect moment to slide your truth across the table and watch their fragile illusions shatter into pieces. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. If this story resonated with you or if it reminded you to check the locks on your own financial independence, please drop a comment below. Share the moment you realized you needed to start keeping receipts. Your stories matter, and reading them builds a community of strength. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of truth and vindication. Until next time, keep your boundaries firm and your records secure. A house is constructed from wood, drywall, and glass, but a home is built entirely on a foundation of trust. In American culture, we hold the concept of the traditional family residence as an ultimate sanctuary. It is supposed to be the one place on earth where the door locks against the harshness of the outside world, where a child can retreat, rest, and grow without the pressure of having to earn their right to exist. But what happens when the danger is not outside the front door, but sitting at the kitchen island? Harper's story is a chilling examination of a home transformed into a toll plaza, a profound reminder that parenting is a sacred duty, not a financial transaction. When a mother slides an itemized invoice for rent across a countertop to her 16-year-old daughter, she is doing much more than demanding cash. She is bankrupting the maternal bond. The core of family responsibility dictates that we prepare our children to navigate the complexities of adulthood, equipping them with the tools they need to eventually build independent lives. It involves long-term guidance, patience, and sacrifice. Yet the concept of sacrifice is easily corrupted. In Harper's household, the word was twisted into a weapon. Sylvia used the illusion of financial hardship to extract labor from a minor, turning a high school junior into a revenue stream to fund a facade of suburban prosperity. This betrayal strikes at the very heart of what we value in traditional family structures. We expect parents to serve as the ultimate safety net. Emotional awareness in child-rearing means recognizing when your child is drowning and extending a lifeline rather than handing them an anchor. When a teenager is exhausted, smelling of industrial dish soap, and sleeping through her morning classes, a parent grounded in emotional intelligence asks, "What is wrong?" They step in to heal the wound. They do not calculate how much more blood they can draw before the child collapses. The failure of Harper's father, a man who chose quiet complicity over conflict, illustrates that remaining silent in the face of exploitation is just as damaging as drafting the invoice yourself. A father's duty is to protect his children, not to shrink into the shadows to appease a tyrant. The story also forces us to examine the devastating consequences of conditional love and the toxic disparity of the golden child and scapegoat dynamic. Fairness is a cornerstone of effective parenting. When a mother buys one daughter a new car while evicting the other in heavy-duty trash bags, she destroys the sibling relationship before it ever has a chance to mature. This blatant favoritism does not just wound the scapegoat, it cripples the favored child. By funding Madison's privileged lifestyle with stolen money, Sylvia taught her youngest daughter that luxury is an entitlement divorced from effort. She left Madison entirely unequipped for a reality that would not indulge her demands. Honesty in parenting requires acknowledging each child's intrinsic value without attaching a price tag to their existence. It means teaching children the value of $1 through shared responsibility, not through extortion and deceit. Generational guidance is another vital thread woven into the fabric of the American dream. We often speak of leaving a legacy, of planting trees under whose shade we will never sit. Harper's grandmother embodied this ideal. She understood the harsh realities of the economy and utilized her resources to guarantee her granddaughters would never face the cold terror of homelessness. She established an irrevocable trust and a maintenance ledger, a silent, enduring promise of security spanning across time. Contrast that enduring wisdom with the mother's fleeting greed. Sylvia chopped down the generational tree to build a decorative patio. She prioritized custom Italian ceramic tiles and the temporary applause of her social circle over her daughter's college education. She sacrificed long-term familial stability for short-term vanity. This is the ultimate failure of guardianship. When parents view their children as extensions of their own ego, or worse, as instruments to finance their desired lifestyle, they sever the roots that allow a family tree to thrive. Harper's journey from a terrified teenager sleeping in a discount retail parking lot to a victorious professional auditing her own abusers is undeniably triumphant. Her heavy black binder, filled with meticulous records and undeniable facts, served as her shield and her sword. But the existence of that binder is also a profound tragedy. A child should never have to compile forensic evidence to defend herself against the people who brought her into the world. We teach our children to tell the truth, to be honest members of society. But we rarely discuss the psychological toll exacted when the architects of their reality are the ones forging the documents. We explore these hidden dynamics, these silent battles fought behind closed doors, because sunlight is the greatest disinfectant for systemic dysfunction. If this reflection resonates with a quiet corner of your own history, or if you simply value stories that champion truth over manipulation, I invite you to join our community. Follow the channel Elena Vengeance. We dedicate our platform to unpacking the complex layers of human relationships, providing a space where survivors can find validation and where the truth is always documented. Drop a comment, share your perspective, and help us continue to shine a light on the stories that need to be told. As you step away from Harper's story, take a moment to look at your own surroundings. We all keep ledgers in our lives, whether we realize it or not. Some are written on crisp white paper and stored in fireproof boxes tracking dollars and cents. Others are invisible, etched into our memories, keeping a silent tally of the promises, kept the apologies withheld, and the quiet moments of unexpected grace. Think about the invisible invoices you've been handed and the ones you might have unknowingly passed to someone else. Are the relationships in your life built on a foundation of genuine equity, or are they sustained by silent debts that can never truly be repaid? We spend our entire lives trying to balance the scales of our history, hoping that when the final audit of our heart is conducted, the columns will reflect a legacy of love rather than a record of transactions. Look closely at the people sitting across your own kitchen table tonight. Are you keeping them there by choice, or are they just waiting for the day they can afford to leave?